There are now 8 NFL head coaching vacancies at this moment, with many more probably still to come. Matt, I have a simple question for you. Which destination is the most attractive to a head coach?
I think the Vegas Raiders looks really good right now, especially how they finished the season. You probably, out of all of the vacancies besides maybe Miami, you have the most secure quarterback situation in Derek Carr. And also, you have a great offense. The defense started to step up towards the end of the season, and they made the playoffs in a division that is very competitive with, the LA Chargers and obviously Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah.
This looks like a place that's going to be solid. They look like they're a few pieces away from continuing to have this success. You have Josh Jacobs, you have Darren Waller. Zay Jones looked really good towards the end of the season. You add a number 1 wide receiver. You improve that defense, and I think that this Raiders team can make a lot of noise in the foreseeable future.
I agree. I think the Raiders is a nice spot, and I actually probably wouldn't have said that before the season.
Yeah, right.
And I think the most promising part about that team right now is that defensive front seven. That pass rush, especially Max Crosby, has turned into a star. After the quarterback. But to me, the most attractive destination is in Minnesota with the Vikings. Obviously, this team is super, super talented, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And it seems to me that the biggest issue with the Vikings missing the playoffs again this season was just that Mike Zimmer's voice wasn't resonating with that team in that locker room, which obviously would usher in, a new head coach. But, just talking about that talent, obviously they're led by Kirk Cousins, who could challenge your idea in terms of the vacancies with, a secure quarterback situation. Obviously, Kirk Cousins is no top 5 quarterback by any metric or
not
means.
Not in prime
time. especially not in prime time. But he's shown you the ability to win playoff games, especially when you have Justin Jefferson, who is a top 5 talent at the wide receiver position, Dalvin Cook, who is a top 5 running back, a veteran touchdown machine, and Adam Thielen. Obviously, Conklin is a nice tight end piece. Defensively is where they have issues, specifically on the back end, but that can be fixed by the right coach, by the right staff. There's still talent on that front seven defensively. Eric Kendricks is one of the best inside linebackers in the game. So obviously the defense needs work, but also another point, the Vikings have been historically patient with head coaches. Each of their last 6 head coaches have been there for at least 4 years. So and I know Vikings fans personally that would say that the Vikings were a little bit too patient with Mike Zimmer. So I think this is just a perfect spot for a head coaching candidate. I can't wait really to see who lands in Minnesota. What do you think about their situation?
I do like their situation for a lot of the reasons you explained. I think the other worry with the defense is that it's talented in that front group, like you said, but it's also getting old. And they've been trying to rebuild the secondary for almost 2 years now with no luck.
Yeah.
And so maybe the new GM, the whole new regime coming in, can make that better. But you're still dealing with those situations. And then also on the offensive side, they've been very inconsistent. As much as it's been more of a defensive issue, and you could talk about Zimmer not connecting with the players anymore or having the control of the locker room. But this offense was night and day. You'd see them go high scoring and play with the best, and then the next week they lose to the Detroit Lions. So I think that's the only concern is what Vikings team are you going to get, and can the coach get the best out of that Vikings team?
And I would chalk a lot of that inconsistency up to coaching. But I have another question for you here, Matt. Who do you want to see where? Which head coaching candidate do you think is the perfect landing spot?
Well, I think Brian Flores, honestly, heading to the Raiders, feels like the right kind of vibe. It almost goes back to that historical, mean, defensive Raiders team that you used to see. And I think that his ability to get a locker room to play above what they're expected to do is exactly what you saw out of the Raiders this season. And so if he could continue that, add that, almost New England Belichick kind of system and locker room belief, I think that'd be great. And so I think Flores in Raiders seems like a perfect fit in my head.
You know how I love Brian Flores. Even with some recent news coming out about him and, his handling of Tua Tagovailoa and that Dolphins kind of franchise as a whole doesn't paint him in the best light. But Brian Flores is a talented coach. He's going to have a job this upcoming season, and that's something that he's earned. I do like the Raiders pick. I think that makes sense. I can see him fitting in there in Vegas. I also like Brian Flores to Jacksonville. Watch out for that. I think him having a quarterback that he doesn't have to worry about too much. And Trevor Lawrence, obviously a former number 1 pick. I think Brian Flores can maybe bring that defense back. And that's kind of always been the Jaguars' identity when they've had one on the defensive side. But for me, it's the Chicago Bears. The most important person within the Chicago Bears franchise is Justin Fields, which means whoever is brought in as head coach, that decision needs to be made with him in mind. With that being said, Brian Daboll, Bills offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, Chiefs offensive coordinator. One of those two need to be the Chicago Bears' next head coach. Talking about Daboll, he has really, really impressed me, especially over the last couple weeks, especially in that Super Wild Card win over the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick. What he's been able to do with Josh Allen, who came in out of Wyoming as an inaccurate quarterback, somebody with a bunch of talent, a big arm, a big frame, but just wasn't as polished, as a quarterback. His evolution, a lot of that has to be, chalked up to what Brian Daboll has been able to do with that offense. Obviously, the Bills' offense is one of the, most explosive, one of the most potent in the league. The same can be said for Eric Bieniemy, who I've been talking about as a head coaching candidate for at least 2 years now. Obviously, this man is one of the brains behind the Chiefs offense, which is, again, one of the most explosive, one of the most potent. He has to have a hand in Patrick Mahomes' success, who is already one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history. So one of those two minds needs to be one of the minds that works on Justin Fields, gets him to take that next step in the NFL. So that's what I want to see happen. I can't wait to see what the Bears do. Hopefully they don't botch it. Matt, I know you got some heavy opinions about the Bears. What do you think about that and their search?
I mean, honestly, as I have continued to look at the Bears, the one concern I've always had is the last time they went offense, they went with Mark Trestman after firing Lovie Smith. Yeah. And so it leaves and then also Matt Nagy, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth when you start thinking about an offensive-minded head coach.
Right.
Brian Flores is also available, so that has to be in consideration.
Definitely.
But no, I absolutely agree. I think when you look at what the Bills do on offense and you start looking at the pieces that Daboll would have in Chicago right away, whether it's David Montgomery, Cole Kmet, Mooney, obviously not the same kind of names as a Knox or a Diggs or even a Singletary, but they're comparable, and I think it's a starting point. And Fields, the best game he's ever had was the San Francisco 49ers game, where he was more deadly on the run than he was really passing.
Yeah.
And Josh, you could say the same about Josh Allen.
Yes.
So I think that is a perfect fit. At this point with Bieniemy, I mean, he can choose whatever position he wants. Maybe he just wants to stay in Kansas City because he wants to take over after Andy Reid. I know you've talked about that before, but both of those guys make a lot of sense in Chicago with a young quarterback.
100%. Again, this decision has to be made with Justin Fields in mind. I get the skepticism about, hiring an offensive mind after what Trestman and Nagy, left.
Too many burns
with the Bears. But again, you're in the situation, you're the Chicago Bears. You drafted up to select Justin Fields. He showed you plenty of promise in his first season, albeit with Matt Nagy leading the way. So whoever is brought in needs to have a plan for Justin Fields, a plan for how he can evolve and take that next step as a franchise quarterback. But that's going to do it for us, though. For Scott Proctor, Matt Morris, we'll catch you next time.